you want to come here. This is what we do. It doesn't read much, but this is a map of all the activities we did, because at some point, even if we're an architecture office, we're trying to explore very different ways of doing things, trying to reinvent part of the architecture practice. And at some point we didn't know what we were doing. We had to try to map actually what we were doing, because some of it was, all of what you see in red would be what we call research, applied research, meaning that is work for which we actually get paid. What's in blue is research we do that we actually have not yet financed yet, and whatever is in black is our infrastructure. So we work with Japan, we work with the US a bit, we work with India, and we do, I will sort of explain a bit what this map is all along. Basically, the office started as a, does that work? The office started as a question. The office is, sorry, I will restart something to make sure it works. Oh yeah, that's right. As Philippe said, the office is called Est-ce, ainsi. It comes from a poem, a French communist poet who made a poem called Est-ce ainsi que les hommes vivent, which means, is it thus the way humans live? It's a very disarming, very beautiful question about the way we inhabit the planet. And we thought it was a good way to start an architecture office to ask this very fundamental, basic question. Is this the way we live? Is this the way we inhabit the planet? And so we started to try to ask questions to architecture more than actually trying to build. We were just trying to ask questions to architecture, and the first question we asked was, is architecture a luxury for only a very limited amount of people, or can it be of service to everybody? So we decided to start working for people that usually cannot afford an architect, and try to find ways in which this could be possible. If architects do not work for poor people, let's say, it's not because they are mean or because they don't want to. Some don't want to. It's also because it's very difficult. The price of what our architecture offices need as money is not suited, is not defined in order to address this particular need. So we had to, more than doing projects, we had to design an office as a project so that it could actually live off very limited means. So there was no office, there was no collaborator, I was alone, I had a computer, and that's it. No printers, no nothing, to try to keep our fee low. And then there was also a way to try to read all the laws to keep our fee very low. So in France, for instance, if you do less than 30,000 euros income per year, you do not charge your clients with a particular type of taxes, of government taxes. So staying below this level was a way to have affordable fees. This is just one. I'll be running quickly through a couple of projects just to show you what we've been doing, and then I'll come to the argument of why we would be, what are the theoretical concerns that bring us in India. This is a kitchen that was made for a very small price. The cost is below the price of manufacturers of kitchen. Manufacturers of kitchen would design one thing and then apply it 1,000 times and always get the same fee. And we designed a specific kitchen that we will never do again at a lower price than the specialist of kitchen, let's say. This was done, just to explain briefly how we work. We always use this wood panel that is extremely low cost. It's actually a very also environment-friendly material. It's a German material, and for instance, there were a lot of little tricks. For instance, we didn't put the kitchen against the wall like it's usually done, because the walls are never very flat. So you have to have a cabinet maker or something to adapt it to the wall. The way we did this, everything was pre-cut by the wood seller, the guy who provides the wood, so that the cabinet maker would just have to assemble it and not spend the time to actually cut the wood and So a lot of little tricks like this to make our fee available. So every time there's a lot of other dimensions to the work we do in terms of theory, but I'm not going to get into this. This is, for instance, we realized it was cheaper to have electricity run visible instead of trying to hide it. And so, because then you have to carve the walls, you have to refinish it, repaint it, and so we try to invent some way of an aesthetic way of poverty architecture, let's say. So these were like, for instance, these were very small projects on which we could spend a lot of time. That's, for instance, the redefinition of the interior of a house, in which we didn't have the money to actually displace the radiators, for instance. So we kept them. We took the walls on which they were leaning. We put them down and we left them hanging in the space, and then redefined the interior space with those. You can see one there on the bottom corner on the left. Redefine the space with these, the presence of these radiators. Just always very very simple, low tricks to be able to work for people that usually cannot work with an architect. I'm not gonna get too much into this. And then the work basically. So let's say. The way we see architectural practice is most of the time that it does not relate to anybody more than anybody else than architects, unfortunately. Like, for instance, architecture magazines are only read by architects, which makes it a bit problematic. I would like my mother, who doesn't have anything to do with architecture, to be concerned with architecture. And I think as architects we are partly responsible for this lack of interest. So we're trying to re-question the role we have in society so that we can be something that is important, like medicine is, like justice is, and not something that is just like I don't know what, but trying to make this something important. Like, for instance, in this case, we only did what was dangerous for the client to do himself. He didn't have the money to do an entire project, so we redid the roof, we redid the upper part, he did the painting, we did the big, large openings. And this political sort of way to look at architecture as being growing and growing, as you will see. But for instance, the window that you see here, as weird as it might seem here, this is forbidden to do in France. In France, you have basically to buy a patented window with European labels. So it makes the people who actually were trying to make windows only buy products that are for us diseases. Those products are diseases because they're sort of the sum. Any window you get will be the sum of people that have been very badly paid during the process of doing it. It will have changed 5 times, 5 countries, and will have a very heavy carbon sort of print. And so we say, okay, we take the money that would cost this window, we give it to you, and you make yourself a window. When we do that, we actually are off the law. So it means like we don't respect the law. So it means like the contractor, if it breaks, there's no insurance. But the contractor is against all these lobbies of windows. So he's like, okay, I'll take the risk. If it ever breaks, I'll replace it. And we've obviously did it a couple of years ago. Nothing broke. And so we're trying to re-dispatch the way, reconsider differently the way the money is used in the production of buildings, so that the production of building would not be part of a lot of dysfunctioning of what we understand as being dysfunctioning of the world's way of going. So these are interior views. This was the window that we were talking about. So this, I saw a lot of homemade windows here. So it might not seem very relevant to you, but actually this is why partly we are here. I'll try to explain that. This is an extension of a building we did for some clients. I'm not going to spend much time on it. This is actually something. So I'm a teacher, and we try to in teaching, we try to get this kind of spirit in the mind of students, to try to have them think very low-tech. So this is a design of a student. It's a pavilion to love. It's basically the size of a bed, extruded on 8 meters tall. And it was done with only that same material, one material from the foundation to the roof. And it was designed and built by the students. And during this process, students were also taking classes of voice. They were singing. They were also accompanied by a choreographer who was trying to have them reconnect with their body, because architects only spend their time on the computer. So they become weird human beings. So this is the foundation system. And these are the students who had to dig that gigantic hole, so they hate me for that. So that we do all these sort of works, and suddenly, as Philippe mentioned, we get that big prize from the Ministry of Culture, which is a sort of a big deal in France, because suddenly the French state says, okay, we pick 15 firms every 2 years, and those 15 firms, we will help them. It's not a prize of money. They just make a book, they make an exhibition that turns around the world. That's how I came here the first time, actually, because part of the exhibition was at Est. But I went to like Japan and the US. And so what was it? It was a lot of help for us. And what was good is that we got that sort of award because we were identified on a very clear position, which was making low price architecture, which in France is not a very common thing, unfortunately. And so, for instance, we got identified by big names, like the Pompidou Center, which is the art institution in France, like the Guggenheim would be in the US, I guess. And they called us because, for instance, they did a new building by Gregorian. I don't know if you know, there's a Centre Pompidou Metz, and they put all their money in that first exhibit and in the building, and then for the second show they didn't have any money. So they're like, okay, how can we recycle how can we recycle an exhibition? And then we were very proud that they thought of us in order to enter that thinking. We didn't get the commission. We were second place, but it was a process of. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I want to cover a large ground. So in the art world, then we had to do a lot of exhibitions. Every time there are some political implications other than the low-cost thing. But for instance, this was an exhibition about the psychologist, I don't know, Frantz Fanon, who is. Whose work was related to what was the psychological impact on colonialism in the psyche of the colonized, and they asked us to try to embody physically through walls what that sentiment would be. And so the take we took was to try to build a minimum egress, the minimum fire escapes that are required in an exhibition space for people to be able to get out if the fire takes, and just build these two walls as the minimum space the colonized people would have in society. Anyway, and this was also low cost. That's another large exhibition we did, again low cost, but with that price. And now I come more towards why we're willing to work with India. We gained access to public commissions, public competitions, and we started doing one, which was a very important one for us, because if everything was going well, then a big crisis happened. We had to rethink everything, because so we proposed a building that's on the very right. It's a simple housing building, but we discovered in this process that we were trying to make it as cheap, as simple as it could be. Very simple housing units with air views on both sides. And we realized the complexity of the administration of buildings in France. You have tons of regulations from the city about the shape that you have to respect, which we understand. But then you have, in order to actually maximize the profit of the architecture itself, even if it's low cost, you have a lot of ratios that define that do the job of the architect. Like or the training that we had in school is totally cancelled by regulations. The fact that the relationship between voids and plane surfaces in the facade is set. The relationship between the interior surface and the outside surface is set. You get all these things that forbid any kind of what compared to the name that we have, which is it thus the way humans live? Actually, we cannot try to come up with an alternative while producing such a building. The kind of materials are set because they have to be labeled with all these sustainable, so-called sustainable products. It's important to know that all the sustainable standards are strongly defined by actually the corporations that manufacture products. So we actually refuse most of these processes of production, and so then the question was, how can we do what we do? How can we do what we're supposed to do? How can we do what we learned in school? How can we be a contribution to a better way of living if there's no room for that? We came to the conclusion that if we were to do a building and we could win one, we would know a priori, before building it, that it would not be part of a solution, but that building would be part of the problem. So that came into a sort of a crisis for us, and we had to, so like for instance, this is the winning issue, and that's that's our problem. It's the same building. You just have like a simple, just a different writing on the facade, but the interior is all set the same. The materials are set the same. So there's no room for a contribution by the production of buildings. Why am I talking about this? Because I think this is coming to you. This might seem hard to believe for now. I discuss a lot with architects here, and but I think this is coming, and I would be very sad that it would happen. So I will just go briefly into some theoretical argument about architecture, because I claim that you don't need to be an architect to understand those things, unlike whatever is being said about architecture. How can we rethink architecture based on the problem that we're faced? We look back at the history of architecture and consider that if there was one thing that was the common thing in Western architecture, at least, a common thread throughout the total history of architecture, what could it be? It's not a particular kind of form or style. We make the claim that it's the concept of order, putting order into the production of buildings, but order in general. The actual system, the stylistic system, the language of architecture that has had the largest span throughout history is called the system of the orders of architecture. It's that system that you can see, the Romans use them. This is all the places, according to the several empires that were launched out of the old Europe, that exported that system of orders all around the world. What's important is that it's called the order, which is already a hint of the rigorism that is embedded into architecture. But it's also, every time that it was there, it was through violence. Architecture has always been exported through people in India or in the south of America did not say, "Oh, we love that order system. Let us please have it." It was imposed on them. Because when an empire goes somewhere, it tries to reshape the way people live to its own manner, and architecture was that tool. Okay, and so we looked a bit at the system of order, and even the system itself does not really make sense. If you look at this is the origin of the system of orders. What is it? It's if the system of order has those shapes, if those columns have those shapes, if that facade has this face, it's because it was a formal system made out of wood. Okay, wood construction would give, if you wanted to build a temple out of wood, it would give you this form. But after it was built in stone, so it doesn't, in order to actually rebuild those shapes, if you keep the form of a building that is built in wood and you try to build it in stone, it becomes very counterintuitive and very complex to actually manage. As you see, the complexity of these are all formal details that are imposed on a structure that is stone, but that's very different from what it would be in wood. So what the system of order is actually a logic, a formal logic of proportion, symmetry, a shape that is imposed on something, however it's supposed to be built. For those who know the history of architecture, Mies van der Rohe said that God is in the detail. If this is the detail, God is surely whoever that is surely not involved in this. And and then we looked at all this order. These are buildings that are made on order. Like there are several reasons to legitimate order. Every time throughout history, I can't. This is a 20-hour classes that I do that I have to do in 5 minutes. So please bear with me. But this, for instance, was done by Jean-Nicolas Louis Durand, a French architect at the Polytechnic School. And he was legitimizing that the order and the symmetry was not a formal device. It's not like Léonard de Vinci because we are symmetrical. It's because of economy. He was saying it's cheaper to actually do symmetrical building because you only have to design half of it and then you can copy it. So every time you would keep the same system but legitimize it in a very different way. This, for instance, is one of the first skyscraper in the US. And if you look at it closely, it's very strange because this is a Parisian building, in fact, that you've blown up. And what seems to be a window here in the facade of a French building is actually expanded so that you have 6 windows in there. So you have a shape that you keep, and then you blow it up because what if you see what the DNA of architects is, meaning to put order in building, you cannot do a building that has no identifiable shape. So, for instance, the Greek people did never design skyscrapers, so we don't have a form for that. So, what architects did is they took a form of a building, blew it up the size of a skyscraper, and then stuck things in there. But that doesn't make sense. And so we went through this whole history of. This is a typical exercise that was given at the École des Beaux-Arts in France. Architects were never trained to follow a construction site, historically. They were trained to take an irregular lot and to re-articulate it in a succession of only regular forms, right? So whatever was irregular is this project tries to make everything regular within an irregular set, okay? So there's tons of, so this has formal implications, but we claim that it goes further than just formal things. This is a kitchen that was very much developed, there were thousands of them made in Frankfurt, in Germany, but through the modern movement. It's made by a German architect called Margaret Schütte-Liotzky. And this kitchen, as you can see on the bottom corner, was designed out of diagrams. Right, in order to limit the amount, as if we were machines, to try to limit the amount of moves the body would have to do on that ordering system. The problem is that it was the first time that you would have a kitchen as a space divided from the rest of the apartment. And that created the seclusion of the woman in the apartment. Before, the kitchen was the place where everything happened, right? And suddenly, when you make the kitchen a technical space, it becomes the woman, because it's always the woman who cooks. And historically, it's changing by us. I hope it does for you too. you know, the social consequences of it are very different from the intent. For instance, you see on the top left corner, these are drawers. And all of these drawers were actually, oh sorry, thank you. All of these drawers here were actually labeled. Here you're supposed to put the knife, here the fork, here the... Who can do that? No, nobody can use that. This is an order that is non-humane, right? But we claim that architecture tends to work on this very rigid order and asks people to do things that are not of human nature, let's say. And then to end on this way of rereading architecture, this is the first social housing in France, in Paris. And what is very interesting is this building has facades, you know, courtyards, walls, doors, but we claim that the real order that happens in this building is not the facade, but it's what it does to people. Because this building creates, actually, it creates a particular social class. It creates the workers' class. Because it says very much in the program the way human beings are supposed to behave. There's a kitchen down there that you can see, and this is just a place where people living in there were getting their plate, and they were supposed to go eat it in family, so that they they would stay together, right? But I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying the building tells them to do so. The food that they eat was actually the food that was taught in the same building to the little girls in the morning, because it's the little girls that have to learn how to cook, and they were telling them this is what you need to eat, while the guys were actually learning, the little boys were learning how to make wood, cabinet making and all this. There were classrooms in there. There were in those classrooms they were stopping earlier than the people who were going to work. So there was actually a place for a kindergarten for kids between the moment of the classes end and the moment where the working parents come back. And during this time, the kindergarten was free. But as soon as the factory was closing, this kindergarten was becoming a paying thing, so that the people would not go to bars and drink alcohol, because alcohol was a big problem at the time, and they would have to pick up their kids and to take care of them. So the building is, it was also telling them to wash, it was telling them to, the way we see here, these are laundry things, because there's very harsh writing from the rich people about the working class, about how they behave and what they're supposed to do. So the real order in this building is to tell the people what they ought to do, and not the facade rhythm, okay? The program is the real order. It designs a social class. And so we claim that architecture is not buildings on its own. It's how a dominating power, a ruling class applies order to the world through particular artifacts. Buildings are one. But if you look at clothing, that's also a 20-hour class as you do on clothing. But the clothing, the vocabulary of the clothing that you see here, which is of the bourgeoisie of the 19th century, has the same vocabulary than the building on the top left. You know, it's symmetrical, it's no color, no... it actually imposes to the body the same order that the building does in terms of behaviors. So this is what happens. That's a very, you know, for any 19th century people looking at the picture on top in France, they would say, "Oh, we are normal, right? That's what's supposed to be an educated person." But Georges Bataille, a French philosopher, made the comparison between these two family photographies to show how there was a regulating order that was a very social one that one tends to forget. How all these objects impose a particular set of values on the way we live. So this is, to close this theoretical argument, this is a work we did about Japan. And we tried to, after having been there for a week, we were supposed to talk about architecture, about architects who do, they're very famous, Fujimoto and all these guys, how their delicate, very beautiful architecture that goes into magazine is wonderful. And we tried to look at it differently and say, okay, however brilliant these guys are, we're not sure they're making a contribution to a better way of living. And so we took 5 elements that usually are not considered being part of architecture. We looked at eroticism, clothing, the presence of the US after the war between 45 and 50. We looked at the bombs of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and we looked at the nuclear accident of Fukushima. And we tried, so along this table, these are 5 lines, we tried to show how these 5 elements are the real architecture, and buildings are just the expression of those phenomena. And so, for instance, I'll go. So that was the table. I can't go through this because it's a 2-hour explanation. But for instance, if you look at, I'll skip clothing because I don't want to be too long. But like the presence of the U.S. This is the island of Okinawa in South Japan. The relationship that Japan has had with the US is a very enlightening one when we look at architecture the way we see. In 1853, the Commodore Perry came in Japan because with an army of boats, because Japan had been closed to any exterior interaction for 2 centuries, and the US wanted to have to use Japan for exchange money and for trading. And so they came with very big steamboats, and they said, okay, we give you 1 year. If in 1 year you do not decide to open your doors to our trading, then we'll come and kick the hell out of you. So they just left and came back a couple of months later. What happened is that Japan was still, since it had been closed for a long time to exterior influences, was still had sailing boats, for instance. They didn't have steam energy, and they knew they could not fight. They would have been destroyed. So when they came back, they said, yes, of course, we open to trade. We are more than willing to work with you. And this launched an incredible reform of the entire Japan. In 5 years, Japan adopted the Gregorian calendar. They switched from their army that was still samurai into conscription. Everybody going to, they changed their uniform. They dropped the samurai one, they went to Western uniform. They adopted the postal service. Anyway, like all major infrastructure was changed about what it was to be a Japanese person in the 19th century. Even the bill, if you look at this is the American bill, and below is the Japanese bill. It looks like there's some kind of influence there. I'll skip that. But going to the nuclear incident of Fukushima, what? Nuclear plants are the only kind of building that can turn the world into a non-habitable place for mankind. That's an architectural problem, right? These are buildings, right? You will never see any architect try to design this. So what good are we? This is the actual life, world-endangering kind of building, and it's not a concern for architects. So we try to look at what does it tell? What is if there is an order that is being implemented by architects, by architecture? The claim that we come up with now is that there actually is an order that we are a manifestation that we do express through the production of our buildings, which is the neoliberal order. I don't know if this term makes sense. Neoliberalism is this economical theory in the US that started with people like Milton Friedman, that was implemented by people like Thatcher, that it's a set of rules that redesign every single thing we believe, in our planet. The clothing, this is, for instance, a little model about people who were on the roof of their houses during Katrina, right? What happened in Katrina is very interesting. There's a book by Naomi Klein. She's a Canadian author. The book is called The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism. This is a fantastic book in which she explains that now this ordering of things, neoliberal ordering of things, is actually happening every time there's a catastrophe. So she says, for instance, take New Orleans. In New Orleans, people have always been fighting against the privatization of schools. They are always for public education. In the following weeks after Katrina, when all the people were too busy struggling for their lives and could not demonstrate against those policies were adopted, right? Does that make sense? It's when people are down that all of what they usually fight against that is being applied, the rise of disaster capitalism. So we see that as architecture. We see that as a reordering of things that is happening, and buildings in there are only a manifestation of it. This is the shameful presence of our president in Japan with Shinzo Abe, right after a couple of months after the explosion of Fukushima, was in Areva, the French nuclear company, to sell nuclear power to Japan. This is crazy. And so this is Milton Friedman, which we make the claim is the architect of what's going on today at the scale of the planet. There's a reordering of things that we believe is architecture. So, India. So there's two ways for me to look at this picture. If I look at the French way, I would say this is crazy. These people who actually work in construction, they don't have any regulation security, they don't have any helmets, they don't have there's an exploitation of women, and you know, like all of horrible things that you know, need to be addressed. But there is an incredible beauty in this. Like, I witnessed such a scene yesterday. I saw a construction site. My arm fell. I get this feeling yesterday that in India, the world, humanity, still has a meaning. There's a humanity to this way of behaving. I don't think the way I come from, where I come from, humanity has any meaning anymore. There's so why we're trying to be here is that we see. I don't know anything about India, and I'm more than willing to learn what's going on, why things are so different, why things are so. There might be a lot of let's say, fantasizing or Orientalism, as Edward Said explained it. There's some sort of romanticism of the difference. But beyond that, I think there's something stronger, which is there still exists a lot of very animals, for instance. Before I came to India, I never saw a free animal. It was either a pet that was you know, raised and you couldn't go out of the house or whatever, or it was some machine put in some square field that was there to eat the grass and never could get out. Here, like the presence of animal entering buildings, of flying, it might sound stupid to you, but your deal with nature is fantastic. We have millions of animals being slaughtered, raised in machines, just to, I don't know if you know that, battery, we call them battery animal. They are just in little squares. They're actually under gigantic stress all their lives, and then we eat that. And so all of this is coming. We might be wrong. I hope we are. If it doesn't happen, you know, all the best. But my scare is that the West has always been good at doing what it does everywhere on the planet, and whether people wanted it or not. So what we know, I know that I can't fight. We can't fight what's going on in Europe. It's too late. It's too strong. when I come here, I see things like this. There are problems, but there's also room for things to happen differently. It's not lost yet. I get the feeling, and that's why we want to be here. So we want to work with Indian architects to try to come up with alternative rules, alternative building standards, for instance, because we're architects and that's mainly what we can have an impact on for now. So that when all this comes, and this is coming, you know, I already see buildings, big billboards with LEED standards, all this sort of extremely corporate way of producing reality with all the dismantling of social fabric that it implies, working conditions, destroying of earthly resources. This is all coming through these very beautiful 3D renderings. And we would like to help fight this process by trying to come up with alternative ways of like what I remember from reading a bit Gandhi, alternative modernity, let's say. Not taking exactly what comes, but trying to rethink it in other ways, because it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work at a level that is extremely daunting. So, and the idea is also to, since we cannot do in France a building that could be a positive contribution, we would like to here try to show that it is possible to do a building that is not a catastrophe, that is not a disease, and go back in France and say, okay, we applied the same kind of requirements you wanted, but we found other ways to achieve this. So this is the goal. So we met. We started to have partners like in Baroda, and to try to come up with a following scheme, which will start by doing an analysis, a book for which we will be looking for funding actually. But we will do an analysis of all the processes that work in the production of a building in Europe, in France, and a comparative study with the way a building is produced, a scanning of the whole thing. Where does the money come from? What's the relationship of people with the crowd that's actually building it? What's the ratio of price for the ground compared to the cost of construction? All things. What are the security conditions? Scan down all of this and to try to see if there are a couple of things from here and there that we can use to actually come back with alternative evolutions than the one I believe you are promised to. This was a workshop, one of the workshops that Philippe was talking about, done in Baroda, where we came and we're trying to understand what India is. So there were 150 students out of these 3 schools who made 50 costumes total. Each costume was, we asked the student to say, okay, what is an important problem about India for you? So that you can come up with what we call wearable architecture that displays this problem, and then we bring all this costume into the public space and we talk about it in public. And so they came with a lot of very important problems, like obviously a lot of things were about violence made to women, but also the westernization of methods, arrival of Walmart, the disappearance of Ayurveda. So that gave us a sort of a mental map of a lot of important issues in India. And so it gave this sort of what I find wonderful formal experimentation, where form is actually a political process. It's not just, oh, this is beautiful, this is not beautiful. The form comes out of a political concern. That's what architects should do. And this is an amount of, and so that's our French partner that would be on the French side. We did one kind of study that is similar to what we would like to do here with this comparative. We studied his office. We scanned it. This is the relationship between how many women and how many guys work in the office. This is the localization of all these projects. This is the kind of clients he has, the amount of public or private funding he has. the evolution of his income, like all the budget issues. So a very systematic approach of what an architecture office is. So that's a 300-page book that gives an idea of what we would like to start with to understand how things are being built here. And then the idea is obviously to try to build alternative buildings on these all these reflections. That's it. 45 minutes. I think that's all of what I have to say. I think, yeah. Do you have questions? Remarks? You can tell that you totally disagree or that we're totally wrong, or please share, because we're here to learn.